Has there ever been a time when you didn't feel like yourself? Maybe somebody did or said something to you and you overreacted in a way that left you feeling embarrassed or confused. Well, today we're going to examine experiences like this through the lens of what Swiss psychotherapist Carl Jung called the shadow. You're listening to Psychedelic Therapy Frontiers, the podcast devoted to exploring the frontiers of psychedelic medicine and what it takes to cultivate a healthy mind, body, and spirit. Psychedelic Therapy Frontiers is brought to you by Numinus and is hosted by me, Dr. Steve Thayer, and my co-host, Dr. Reid Robison. In addition to explaining what the personal shadow is, Reid and I explore the function of the shadow, how shadow content reveals itself to the conscious mind, methods of doing so-called shadow work, the importance of self-compassion and acceptance when doing this work, how psychedelics can be used in shadow work, and much, much more. A few announcements before we get into the episode today. If you're looking for professional training pursuant to becoming a psychedelic-assisted practitioner, please check out the courses we offer here at Numinus. You can click on the link in the show notes or go directly to numinus.com/training and use the code PTF10 for 10% off selected trainings. If you've listened to the show for a while, you've likely heard Reid and I talk about the psychedelic clinical trial work that Numinus does. If you or someone you know is interested in being a participant in a psychedelic clinical trial, you can click on the link in the show notes or go directly to numinus.com/research to learn more about the trials we're currently running. If you'd like to support our show, you can do so by leaving a rating or review in places like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you're watching on YouTube, you can like the video, subscribe to the channel, or even share the episode with somebody you think might need to hear it. Without further ado, here's today's episode on shadow work. So Reid, last time we recorded a podcast episode, we talked about defense mechanisms, and that was a fun jaunt into defense mechanisms, but it had us thinking about shadow, the personal shadow, Jung's and Freud's to some extent, shadow, and what shadow work might mean. So we thought it might be a nice follow-up for today to discuss the shadow and shadow work.
I saw this article several months ago saying, this shadow work journal is trending on TikTok. And I thought that was cool. It's a sign of that the new generation, Gen Z, is really embracing the work. Because I think whether you want to or not, you're going to do some shadow work. Like, my view of it is it's kind of part of life, and it will pull you in there eventually at a different time. But we can get into that a little more as things unfold.
Well, maybe one way to get into it, we mentioned Carl Jung. We've mentioned this quote many times. In fact, it's on my website. I like it so much. And that is, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate.
Yeah.
I think it's just a great sentence. It refers to the importance of shadow work, the driving force that unconscious content has in our behavior and in the way we react to triggers and the emotions that we experience and sometimes repress or ignore.
Well said, Carl.
Thanks, Carl.
Yeah, Carl Jung is awesome. And I'm going to meet your Carl Jung quote and raise it, Fritz Williams quote.
All right.
That sounds kind of relevant. If I can find it here. Suffering and joy teach us, if we allow them, how to make the leap of empathy, which transports us into the soul and heart of another person. In those transparent moments, we know we know other people's joys and sorrows. We care about their concerns as if they were our own. It may not seem that related, but I bring it up as one of the fruits of shadow work. And shadow work can mean a lot of things. We can maybe share our take on it, our best definitions, but there's this theory that I think is fun of positive disintegration that's come of the psychological literature. And I think it's cool because it talks about, in a really compelling way, how you have to break down your mental, psychological structures in order for growth to occur, like you do your muscles at the gym. Not too much, or you could hurt them, right?
Yeah.
Same goes for our psyches, window of tolerance and resources and all that, but this positive disintegration, another way to talk about an ego death, I think is another way of talking about shadow work too. And the main takeaway for me is that when feeling stuck, in shadow work personally, and with a lot of the friends and clients I've worked with, it can feel like one of the signs of it. It can feel hopeless. It can feel like you're really lost, and but that is like almost a special sauce of like. It's not really surrender if it's easy to do in a way, or the rewards aren't as great. But if you think about like a problem you're stuck in, if you try to think your way out of it with the same brain that got stuck, you're not going to get there. You have to break down some things, let your more like self-realized, authentic self emerge, and then maybe you can get out of that stuck place with the new self.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember exactly the quote, but early on, the Fritz Williams quote, there's something, he says something to the effect of, if you allow it.
Yeah. If you let your suffering and joy teach you.
If you let yourself. And I think that does speak to this process of shadow work.
Yeah.
Because what is the shadow, right? These are the drives, the emotions, the traits that we keep from our conscious mind, either consciously or unconsciously, but often unconsciously. So you talk about stuckness. Sometimes feeling stuck is evidence that the shadow is at work. And some people have called it the sort of psychological immune system. It's not that the shadow is inherently bad. It's just sort of the place that houses a lot of these repressed or suppressed, as I said, qualities or, thoughts or feelings that are hard for us to believe or confront are a part of us.
Yeah. And I saw a quote by Jung, and I don't remember exactly how it read, but it was something to the effect of your shadow is the part of you that you do not want to become, or like the one with the values that you don't aspire to.
Yeah. It's sort of in opposition to the ego, the values, or maybe even the superego, but the version of us that we do aspire to, that we hope is quote unquote really us. Another Jung quote, since we're on the topic.
It's a quote battle for Jung.
One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The latter procedure, however, is disagreeable and therefore not popular.
Not popular.
It's hard.
It's becoming popular among Gen Z.
Apparently, if TikTok is to be believed.
Yeah, good job.
Well, it certainly has utility, but like you were saying earlier, it's really, really hard. The
other thing, maybe I like to dwell on, just because I find it philosophically interesting, is sadness gives us depth, that kind of idea. But if you take that to a big picture view of yin yang and the shadow, I just think it's interesting because like everything contains the seed of its opposite. Like Darth Vader has the seed of goodness. Luke has the potential to follow his father to the dark side, right? And there's this constant like oscillation of forces in the universe of yin yang, light dark, if you will, and it needs to be so. Like the dualities, as frustrating as they are at times, need to exist, because it's even like Taoism is built on this idea that there's this unseen force, and it's a force, and there's a dark side to it, and a positive side. It's not like this Christianity view that's just focusing on the light only, and it's kind of encouraging us to acknowledge those forces, even the dark ones, so you can really ride the waves of it. Yeah.
Is that what is meant by Jung's process of individuation? Right? It's not a purification. It's not that we get rid of that seed of darkness in us. It's that we approach it and we integrate it.
Yeah. I think integration is probably what he might be tempted to call it these days, because if you read his writings on individuation, which I like the term, it's just less
face valid in today's vernacular.
Yeah, less commonly thrown around, maybe a bit more of a tongue twister at times. I don't know, individuation. But it's it's the returning to wholeness of the self, kind of toward that childlike state, but returning with the gifts of your lessons that you get through life that might not be fully whole, right as you come out of the womb, for example. But
it reminds me of what we talked about a while ago with our adult development episode that a lot of people liked. That there's this sense of returning to what you described as like sort of this childlike oneness, but with maturity.
Yeah.
Right. Not that we're being childlike, or childish, I should say.
Yeah, one way I've heard it described as individuation, I'm going to butcher it from now on, is developing a healthy relationship between your ego and your higher self. Like, is one way that I feel like is practical to look at it, but it's this, essentially this unfolding and development of the real you.
Yeah, the real you, maybe in quotation marks.
Yeah.
Because I've had some clients, and I've struggled with this myself, a lot of distress around what is the real me, especially, and this is a nice trailhead into shadow work. So let's say, they think of themselves as a patient, kind person, and, one of their kids triggers them in a way, and they react really aggressively. Maybe they say something overly critical. They sort of overreact. And then upon reflection, it's like, man, that wasn't me. That's not the patient, kind person that I like to think myself as. And then oftentimes what happens next is a lot of self-shaming. And then that leads to further repression of what gave rise to this anger. Like, what is it? What is it in there that you're not willing to look at that resulted in this sort of, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde phenomenon, where all of a sudden you're Mr. Hyde and you're like, that's not me.
Yeah, there are these forces beneath the surface that we don't always have awareness of, that come from a lot of different places. Like you talked about the personal unconscious and even the collective. Like you could think about the cultural and ancestral forces at play, or the archetypes, like getting even kind of deeper. But all those things are in there, and it makes sense that we're shaped heavily in the family we're raised in and the culture we're raised in. And there are some forces driving us to do things or show up in a way that may not be consistent with what we hope to be. And the shadow work is the way to find those and bring them into the light, and kind of restructure these forces into a way that we, aligns with our higher self.
Right. And I'll make the point again that bringing them into the light is not a process of getting rid of them.
Yeah.
Right. It's again, not a process of purification, right? In maybe the religious sense, where you just sort of get rid of all your sins and you're this perfect, actualized being.
Yeah.
It's more of a process of integration. Because a lot of times what could be described as shadow parts are there because of deep wounding, right? They're because of needs not being met. They're, in the IFS sense, they are exiles that are hard for us to believe or admit are there.
Yeah, and it's depending on how you define it, you could apply this shadow work term to the big, like, unhealed parts or deeper wounds, or to everything beneath the surface of our awareness that's driving us, and some of it may be leading to dysfunction in your life, and a lot of it not, but still part of this shadow, I think.
Yeah.
What's kind of a bit of an aside, but I think an important kind of preface as well, is Ram Dass talks about becoming nobody. There's even a documentary in that name. But when you hear him talk about it, he says, before he became nobody, he had to become somebody. And we've talked about this in different ways, but I just wanted to tie it in here of, like, you do need ego development, and there is a risk of tearing down your mental structures if you don't have solid ground to stand on, because then you're just like a hot mess and a million pieces on the floor and can't function. So there is, you do have to kind of remember your zip code, as I've heard him say, through the process.
Yeah, we've talked about that in terms of like when to or whether or not to do psychedelics, right? For the purpose of self-exploration or healing. Because like we've discussed many times, psychedelics can have this ego-dissolving effect. And if there isn't enough of an ego there in the first place, if you don't know who you are to some extent, then that can be really disorienting. And a lot of times shadow content comes to the front of the stage in a way that's really hard to digest or make sense of.
Yeah, so there's two things that can happen. You can voluntarily dive into your shadow work, which is a nice luxury to have, luxury or opportunity, privilege. Well, I don't even know. None of those capture it, but I have not met a grown-up human who has not gone through some kind of dark night of the soul in their life thus far. And many people, and it could be getting like a really bad injury or medical diagnosis or breakup or whatever, your world turned upside down, but we're often thrust into it and forced to confront it without having the, the ability to pick and choose exactly when and where and how, And so I just wanted to acknowledge that, because I think some of the most fruitful shadow work in my life has been thrown at me.
Yeah. So what does that feel like? What does it feel like when shadow work is thrown at you? I've used the word disorienting, but I think it can also cause you, like we were talking about earlier, to question who you really are. I thought I was this nice, kind, patient person, and here I am, after being triggered, behaving in a way that doesn't sync up with who I really feel like I am. Oh shit, what do I do? Like, and that can be what going through a dark night of the soul feels like.
Yeah, like it's kind of like I was describing earlier, of getting to that point of really feeling lost, like not, I might be getting towards feeling lost, or I might be, there's a chance this could make me feel lost or hopeless or whatever. But like I see it as a Jesus on the cross moment of like, God, why hast thou forsaken me? Or really questioning, really just like, and then that's the place you just surrender from. So what does it feel like is scary as hell.
Yeah, the psychological rock bottom.
The dark night of the soul, I think, is a fitting way to talk about it. And there can be little microcosms of this throughout life, quite often, in fact. And the big ones can be, tragic and life-altering, of course, but I just think that shadow work sometimes happens, or it happens to us, and maybe even is driven by our soul's natural knowing that is part of the individuation and waking up process. I do believe that. I know it's not something I can empirically validate necessarily, but I believe that this is part of our life process is going through that growth.
Yeah, and I will say sometimes we react to those opportunities in ways that events that we are not ready for it, right? So we could react with further repression or suppression or projection, to a call back to our defense mechanism episode. We could react with our firefighters and managers, to reference IFS. Maybe we just sort of drink it away, or we scroll it away on Instagram, or in one or more ways we avoid this unconscious content.
And I'll tie in another past episode thing, and it happens to be a Ram Dass thing. Sorry, not sorry.
How dare
but you. It's when we were talking about all tools can become traps. That's how they work. I'm just thinking of you kind of do need to have these reactions come up to work with them. It's like that here and now concept that's a basic premise in psychotherapy, right? That it's easier to work with the stuff when it's on the surface, when it comes up, or some of the specific psychotherapies. I'm thinking of Hakomi just because I like it. Involves this really gentle approach to mindfulness and creating the space and giving the time and the gentle prompts for something to emerge, some energetically charged thing, whether it's a reaction or a grief memory or whatever.
You're using some words here that are really important, like space and gentle. When we're doing shadow work, it's really, really important to do it with compassion, to give ourselves safe, self-affirming and validating space. This is often very difficult to do on one's own. Shadow work journals notwithstanding. It can be really helpful to do it with loved ones, to do it in the context of therapy or coaching, to do it with community, because by its very nature, this system that keeps these things in the shadow out of the light of our awareness wants to be self-sustaining. There's good reason why this stuff is in the shadow. It's really, really hard to confront. So when and if we do it, whether it's thrust upon us or we decide we're diving in, it's really important to have support.
Yeah. And I guess with psychedelic work, that's an example of often, or hopefully with the right preparation, that's a possibility of getting, encountering some big, scary shadow stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You still don't know if you will and how big it'll be, but that is an example of people diving in and doing the brave work on purpose. And sometimes they're going for something else. Maybe it's a physical ailment that they're addressing, or maybe they're interested, or it's a religious ceremony or whatever. And then, they find themselves in deep in the shadow.
Yeah. Yeah. We stress that a lot, preparation. And as important as it is, you can tell me if you think differently, Reid, but I don't think one can truly prepare for an encounter with the shadow in such a way that, like, when it happens, you're like, that's no big deal. At least the times when I've, either on purpose or not on purpose encountered my shadow, it's often like, oh my gosh, this is like jumping into cold water. I don't care how many times I do it, it's still going to take my breath away. And it can be confusing. And like you said before, it can also leave you feeling a little helpless and hopeless.
Yeah, I agree. Just like you can't ever fully prepare for an experience with the Numinus, if you will. The Numinus OUS, because this podcast is brought to you by Numinus with the US at the end. But there are definitely things you can do to give you skills and confidence on the uncertain path forward. Like, I'm thinking of little examples, like some exercises I've done with people in, whether it's a course of individual, couples, family, or group therapy, retreats especially. Like, there's this funeral exercise, for example, of imagining, visualizing two funerals, both your own. One of the person you might be on the current trajectory unchanged, all your current shit included and amplified over the course of time. And the person, you're capable of becoming, your ideal self on this trajectory, and looking at some specific domains of what that feels like, and between the ideal life and the life that you might be at risk of settling into a rut towards.
I like that exercise because it's almost a way of taking your shadow in small doses.
Yeah.
Like in small little samples. So to go back to jumping into the cold water, it's maybe the difference between diving into a freezing cold lake versus just sort of splashing some cold water on your face. Mm-hmm. So you habituate a bit to this feeling of discomfort.
Yeah. Yeah. Like cold water as an example. This morning before I left the door, not immediately before, it's before I got dressed.
Your cold plunges right by your front door.
Yeah, a dip on the way out. It is, it's close to where I get dressed. So I went out and took a dunk, and, did I want to? There were parts of me that didn't, that's for sure. But did I feel good having done it? Yeah. But I, beyond the little spike of dopamine for a few hours, I'm doing it for that purpose, like to practice moving towards the discomfort, because you're going to need it in those shadow work times. Yeah. Because the natural inclination, of course, is to run the hell away.
Yeah, and I think the practice of moving toward discomfort is generalizable, but isn't always generalizable.
Yeah.
And the stereotype is, I'm a military veteran myself. I've worked with a lot of first responders and veterans, and they're often very tough people. Physically tough, psychologically tough in certain vectors. Yeah. Right? They could do things and tolerate things psychologically that many of us could not. And then they're confronted with things that just leave them in puddles. And they're often things from their childhood. They're often things with their partners. Or they're just sort of regular everyday stressors that just seem banal and stupid because they've had to duck gunfire, and now everyone in the office is upset because their printer's out of toner or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. And there's always a balance and a duality at play, and a risk of bypassing or over forcing things. It's that Tao concept I think we were talking about, that force that, you really need to find the middle path through.
And I'll say it again, I think the middle path is paved by compassion and acceptance. And I talk about this all the time. True, yeah. It's probably an evidence of my own shadow to be frank. Maybe I'm projecting a bit on what other people need because I need it. I've been very self-disclosing on this podcast about my history of self-rejection, and I bet a lot of you can relate. It's not unique to me at all. And that's been some personal shadow work I've had to do. Like, why do I do that? Why do I self-reject? What was it? What did I experience when I was young, if anything? Or is this an ancestral burden of some kind? Or, what sort of twisted payoff do I get, right? By self-shaming or putting myself down. That was one awareness I had sort of my young adulthood, is like, okay, I think I really did believe I wasn't good. And I would say disparaging things about myself. But what I noticed was that people would often validate me. Oh, no, you're not a bad guy. You're cool, whatever. And I started to like that. And so maybe that perpetuated a bit.
You still do it a little bit.
I kind of do. We were actually, we were talking about it before this podcast, actually. Yeah, I still do it a little bit. And so I've had to like encounter that in many, many helpful ways. Some of them, to your point earlier, voluntary, and some of them involuntary.
Yeah.
And so I've had compassion for that part of me that does it, but also love that part of me and update that part of me on the current state of affairs as Steve at 41. Like, maybe I don't need to do that anymore.
Look at it and joke about it as it peeks its head in real time. But the other thing I've noticed that you've done in that broad category is, like, I remember we were talking about you working on, and I work on this as well. So it resonated as like accepting compliments instead of shying away.
Yeah.
For example, just like what are the things, manageable little things you can do on the path? Yeah.
It's a good example. It's one that I have benefited from. That sounds like you have too. And it's one I suggest to a lot of my clients who have this struggle, because it's a way of sort of splashing the cold water instead of jumping right into the cold plunge. I can accept a compliment, and I can feel both simultaneously how good that feels and what it does to the person who paid the compliment. But I can also feel that twinge of, oh, if I don't, poo-poo this compliment, I'm not going to get the reaction that my younger self just thought was delicious, where people were like, come on, man. And they just sort of keep piling on the compliments. So that was hard for me to accept, that was something that I did at first unconsciously, and then later in life a little bit more consciously, and to sort of let go of that particular tool because it had become a trap has been a journey.
Hard to accept being a signpost on the path showing you that you're on the right path, right? Is that, like we were talking about earlier, the shadow is often the parts that we don't want to believe are us, or are going to reflexively try and deny.
Yeah, hard to look at them, hard to admit that they're true. But I would say that the payoff, and my younger self wouldn't have believed this, the payoff is awesome, right? And I think that younger part of me, by doing this, in this example, accepting compliments, actually gets more of what he was trying to get by using the old tool of fishing for compliments or putting myself down. Yeah. Meaning that by just saying thanks, that means a lot to me. People actually do like me. They like being around me, and they may offer more praise in the future. So that sensitive part of me that's just like this bucket with holes that can't get enough of that still gets some of it.
Yeah, there's a better way, a way that you've discovered that you can even give yourself those compliments, or you can even thrive if people don't give them to you for a while, right? Things like that.
Well, that's the next level up, right? Is to be able to just say, even if people aren't complimenting you, or heaven forbid they criticize you, and you say, you know what? Good job anyway. You did your best. You don't have to be perfect. That's incredibly healing.
Yeah. I find it interesting. This is another bit of an aside, but to look at where Jung came from as the kind of the founding father of shadow work and these ideas, and as a sensitive soul who did a lot of his own shadow work, and including like the deepest deep dive on dream work of anyone I've heard of, right? But he, it was interesting because he was born late 1800s-ish, 1875, he's Swiss, but he was born to a pastor, and I believe his mother was a daughter of a pastor, but she was also like the richest family in the whole country.
Wow.
Which, I don't know exactly how that shaped him, but the pastor stuff certainly played an influence because he was known for his combining of the the mystical and the mundane, or the empirical psychology with the mystical stuff in a really cool way. Then, no, actually, it wasn't his mom who was rich. He married, his wife, Emma, was from the richest family in the country. He had, I think, an older sibling who lived like 3 days. And then there was a younger sister born a decade later, something like that. But and this is at a time when, like we've talked about, and I even mentioned briefly today, as Freud, kind of started this psychodynamic crusade, but it was going in an interesting direction, maybe hyper-focused on the sexual
psychosexual
impulses.
development.
So Jung kind of steered that in a good way, and believed that we are all like intrinsically motivated by this. He didn't use the term inner healing intelligence, but by this force, this vector towards self-realization. Yeah.
You mentioned, dream work, and Reid, what do you think of dream work? Sort of in modern psychology, neither one of us is necessarily a psychoanalyst. But people ask us, because we're mental health professionals, like, oh, I've got this dream. What does this mean? What's your opinion on dream work?
Well, I'll share my favorite secret dream work hack, if you don't tell anyone, is that like when someone tells me a dream, I found that if you plug it into ChatGPT and ask for an interpretation in Jungian style, it'll give you excellent piece of work that you could bring into your session and use for discussion. But
yeah, ChatGPT is going to take our jobs here pretty soon.
But I love dream work. I don't hyper focus on it or try to make work there where it may not be, but I certainly encourage clients to bring their dreams, and don't ask them necessarily, although I'm tempted, is what did you dream about last night? But I kind of set that open invitation, and I always have a journal by my nightstand and go in these phases of chapters of capturing dreams and chapters of just forgetting to even turn over and try to. And it's funny, my scribbles in a sleepy stupor of that often aren't legible, but I've had some really meaningful dream experiences. But to answer your question, like I kind of liken it to psychedelic content that comes up during journeys in a way too, of like really interesting content. What might it mean, but not getting over attached to figuring it out because we don't have an answer key.
Right. Yeah, I think I have similar thoughts. It's been said that it's the royal road to the unconscious, dreams are. And I'm on the list. It's certainly on the list of ways to access the shadow when we're doing shadow work. If it's unconscious, how do we get it conscious, right? This is one of the ways it's been said we can do it. I think one of my personal resistances to dream work is the idea that certain themes that show up in dreams have specific meanings that are generalizable. And, you could get this from a Google search or the aforementioned ChatGPT. But, what does it mean if you're falling, or if you're flying, or if you're struggling to fly, or if you're running from somebody, if your teeth fall out, if you're naked in public, or if you show up late to your recital or whatever? These are things that are pretty common that people report in their dreams. And you don't have to look very hard to get common interpretations of those things. But your use of the term answer key, I think, is a good one. I hesitate I certainly don't make interpretations of my clients' dreams. And I sometimes discourage them from making literal interpretations as if their dreams are prophecy. And if any of you are dream experts and better than us, please let us know. It's not something I've studied deeply, but I'll sometimes just do the therapist thing. Well, I might say, well, what does it mean to you? What did it trigger in you? What are you thinking about as a result of this dream? What are you nervous about? What are you afraid of? What unrealized goals do you have, because it might be at least a representation of, I feel generally anxious in my life. I feel generally fearful. I feel unfulfilled. Yeah,
you bring up a good point. I definitely look for recurring themes, images, recurring content in dreams as a sign of like, let's spend a little time on that. But I think that Jung liked dreams so much because he saw it as, he was known to say that most of our unconscious is just far off limits and hard to access. And I think he saw it as daily ways of potentially tapping into that in a pretty kind of raw way.
Yeah. I wonder if it's also because he had a particularly rich dreamscape. Like a lot of us don't dream in very vivid ways, or at least we don't recall our dreams. I'm one of those people, and every once in a while I'll have like a super trippy dream. But man, my wife has dreams that are basically entire novels, and with like a plot and a protagonist and antagonist, and she remembers them in great detail. And yeah, I mean, sometimes I wish I could, 'cause that would be pretty awesome.
Yeah, I think you're right. Just like, people have a different level of, say, hypnotizability and whatnot, and a different level. We're all on a different place on the spectrum of a million domains of being human. And Jung was really interesting because if you look at his art, I have his red book at home, a big copy that's just a trip to flip through. But he was the victim of some serious bullying as a kid. He had fainting spells that were kind of unexplained, and other things, like he studied word association deeply formally. Well, first he wanted to be an archaeologist, then he goes to med school, but then he's like studying these things that you could see how they go into or play into who he was and what he contributed that we talk about so much.
Yeah. So what about other ways to access the shadow, other ways to access the unconscious? If we can't necessarily observe it directly without the help of some powerful phenethylamines or tryptamines.
My favorite is, well, I have lots of favorites, but one is trigger work. Just looking at any times throughout the day or recent days when you were activated, where you had strong feelings. And like, these could be little things like road rage, or it could be things like, you smelled something that reminded you of a trauma that's really hard to face. But, and that example requires a little more cautious exploration, of course, but we all have triggers, and, we say on here, triggers are friends to follow because they point you to the work and they show you your internal mechanism of vulnerability or your undone shadow work, if you will. And so it's, triggers are this beautiful thing that bring the shadow out for a second. And so, and I like to take an inventory of that and, work on them, bring them out in the work in that compassionate way.
And there are different structured ways to take a look at those triggers, questions you can ask yourself, like gather the details, do a little detective work.
Yeah.
What was said to me? Who said it to me? How did I feel? What did I think next? What did I do in response to that trigger? And then maybe just thinking, why did I do it? You aren't necessarily always going to come up with answers to those questions. And you could add a journal to this, just sort of write these things down, see if you can track themes over time, or maybe by paying attention, you eventually sort of get deeper and closer to the root of these things.
And you're right. You often don't get to that why very easily, or, often maybe, but there are certainly countless times I can think of personally and with others that, it takes a little time and further peeling away layers to see what's underneath it. Like, it's routine for me to identify something and be like, oh, I don't know why I do that yet. But the answer is in there somewhere. Will I get to it? And when, who knows? But I think one of the ways I work on that is just looking at a couple things. Like, what was the earliest time I felt that way, right? Or what are some other times I've been triggered in the same way? But often if we go early, like childhood, an experience of feeling like furious because you're made out to be the bad guy, or feeling like unheard. What's the earliest time you felt unheard? And making sure I pause and assess, like, what was the unmet need here? Because that's often, a really helpful thing to take an inventory of. And then for me, it's like natural compassion ensues of like, oh, younger child version of me was lost in a grocery store once upon a time. And that felt similar.
Yeah. I like that you added the compassion. Of course, That can, well, let me back up. I totally lost my train of thought.
I like losing my train of thought. I'm just
it's
kidding.
a trigger that's a friend to follow.
I think it's funny. But how do you get it back?
It's totally gone.
gone.
But we were talking about self-reflection, awareness generating, and like we were talking about, you're not always going to get the immediate answer why. There are other ways to tap into what might be in your shadow. One of them is to sort of look at the feedback you get from others.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's the old sort of fun adage, if everyone in your life is an asshole, you might be the asshole.
Yep.
A little bit of a pejorative way of saying it, but if you get consistent feedback from many different sources on something that isn't in your awareness, then it might be worth looking at.
It reminds me of, for some reason, of our fun conversation with Carolyn, who wrote Existential Kink, and how she was talking about this radical approach of anything uncomfortable in your life, just like assuming you brought that on and that's awesome and there it is for you and you did that and let's make the most of it. Let's dance in that rain.
Yeah, it's a good perspective, right? This trigger is something for you, not something that's necessarily happening that you have to lament. That doesn't mean every stressor that's where you get into sort of the toxic positivity.
Thank you for the trigger.
Yeah, it's just to say, well, the reason that I shouldn't be feeling bad because everything that happens to me that's bad is happening for me. Like, you need to tread lightly a little bit, but it is a resilient perspective.
Yeah, and it's just essentially a stance of gratitude, and we know that goes a long way. Yeah. With the growth mindset, gratitude, growth mindset, bring on the triggers. There's one way to approach it.
Yeah. We mentioned therapy. It's a great way to get some professional feedback on what might be residing behind the veil of your consciousness. Yeah. Sign up. What else? Anything else help you get down into that shadow that we haven't mentioned?
Yeah, so there is, what do we avoid? What are we avoiding? What is really activating? What is heavily charged? What are the things that lead you to be kind of feel derailed in your, day to day? What makes things more difficult when it comes up? Just things like that. But sometimes it's hard. You do need a mirror, and I bring this up because looking at like when people get into relationship, and this can apply. It applies especially to intimate partnerships, of course, because you're just getting closer and closer and pushing all the buttons. But this happens in workplace and wherever humans bump into each other. But that is an accelerated path to doing trigger work. Because for many reasons, but one of them is that concept of mirroring. We mirror things to each other, and in relationship, it's somewhat it's a different path to go be a hermit in the woods and work on sitting in silence. Right.
That's a good point. Yeah. Intimate relationships are shadow work dojos. Like nothing's going to trigger you as hard as somebody that you care about or you want to care about you.
Yeah. Yep. And just realizing, this isn't really a how to work on it, but another thing I try to keep in mind is how important surrender is through the process. And by surrender, I mean like in any moment, our mind, body, psyche, soul can either open up to life or close off to it, shy away from it. You can, be here fully now, or you can be half here, or find all the ways of distracting or bringing on the next moment. And I think remembering that, even every breath, if you need to, inhaling life and just having that stance of surrendering to what is in the moment rather than trying to control, change it, resist it. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Surrender is a tricky concept for many of us.
Yeah.
We often give it as navigation instructions for a psychedelic experience. Let go, allow, and through surrender. And, some of my clients, when they hear surrender, they think, well, what do you mean? So if I'm feeling angry in the moment, does surrender mean I run the guy off the road? Did I just totally indulge this feeling of anger? No,
Surrender.
not necessarily. But it's more, I like the word allow a little bit better. Accept.
Yeah.
And it might look like, okay, I'm feeling really angry right now. And when I feel this anger, I want to run this guy off the road. Interesting. There's got to maintain a little bit of equanimity here. And so it's a process of allowing the anger to be present. It's not suppression. It's not like, oh, shouldn't feel angry. I was told by mom and dad that anger's bad. I'm not supposed to feel angry. So I'm going to respond by, being overly kind and ooey gooey or whatever. It's okay. I'm feeling angry. This person cut me off. It's okay. It's okay that I'm feeling angry. I don't want to run them off the road. At least not all of me wants to run them off the road. So it starts with acknowledgement, acceptance, and then you can take action.
Yeah. Surrender, allowing, like that quote we read by Fritz, if we allow it.
Yeah.
And you're bringing up another example. I kind of clump it in with trigger work, but like emotions are a gateway to doing shadow work, and it makes sense because like every time we feel an emotion, this very primal mechanism that we thankfully have hardwired into us and can of course run amok and feel pesky at times, but those things give us information of how to navigate life in a good way, kind of almost beneath the surface of our awareness, and come from the shadow in many ways. And there's then a bodily felt sense that we can get to know in us, and there's an action tendency like the road rage might posture you. And then we get to practice layering on this kind of mindful approach to being with your rage for a moment instead of, acting on it and getting yourself into trouble, like in a maladaptive way.
Yeah. I remember a time where I was invited by the universe to allow one of these emotions. I was watching a movie, I think with my wife, and something happened in the movie that all of a sudden tears just immediately started welling up behind my eyes. And I may have shared this experience before on the podcast, but we have new listeners. I hope. And so my initial response was, do whatever you can not to cry. And just sort of force those tears back, swallow them, get angry at the tears, just do whatever you can not to cry. And in that moment, I was, had the presence of mind enough to just reflect on that. Okay, why? Why am I trying not to cry? I don't think my wife would mind if I cried in response to this very, very sad thing that was happening in the movie. What's that about? And what might it feel like to just go ahead and cry? What am I worried am I worried about what she might think? Am I worried about what that might say about me? Some of these stereotype beliefs, like I'm not a strong man because I'm watching Inside Out and it's making me cry. Or whatever.
That's a good example.
Yeah.
And I hate to break it to you, especially after your sad story, but we don't have new listeners. And so listeners, our shadows want you to tell your friends to listen.
We have, it's the important content that needs to get out there for the benefit of humankind and our our egos. How about that?
Okay. Yeah. Coming from both places. That's a great example. And it reminds me of another clue on the path of shadow work that I try to keep in mind is it actually came from an ayahuasca ceremony once upon a time of this kind of mantra emerged of love the resistance. And at first I'm like, that sounds like a Hunger Games thing or whatever. I don't know. But
join the resistance.
But like that which comes up in me and resists things that may be obviously good for my soul and humanity or whatever, what is going on? And get curious about that in a loving, compassionate way. And there's a lot on the other side of that, like your resisting the tears story.
Yeah, I had a comparable insight also in an ayahuasca ceremony.
What do you know?
It was something like, you are not sick. That these things that are showing up in you are not bad things. They're there for a reason. And it was actually, people often will vomit when they're in ayahuasca. It's one of the ways that people purge, as it is said. And so I was feeling a little nauseated, and that's when it came to me. It's like, and it was sort of symbolic. You don't actually need to purge in this way because you are not sick. And again, it wasn't to imply that I was a fully actualized being without flaws. It was these things that I saw as flaws are actually there for a reason. So, loving the resistance as an example.
And then did someone or the shaman sing "You Are Not Broken, You Are Unfolding" song, and your mind was blown because of the synchronicity of it all.
And then I allowed the tears to come and I wept. Yes. Yeah. Good times. Well, Reid, I think we've fully covered shadow work. There's literally nothing that could be said.
Go to our TikTok shop and get the journal.
We should come up with our own journal.
Yeah. You just should on yourself.
Oh, dang it. I guess there's more shadow work to be done.
Well, good time, Steve. Thank you. Talk to you next time.
Psychedelic Therapy Frontiers is brought to you by Numinus, a mental wellness company committed to tackling the global mental health crisis by delivering best-in-class psychedelic-assisted therapies, contributing to the body of primary and clinical psychedelic research, and fostering healing through community connection and social responsibility. You can learn more about Numinus at numinus.com. That's Numinus.com. If you enjoyed the show today and you want to support us, here's how you do it. Rate and review the show on platforms like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Subscribe to the Numinus YouTube channel, like the videos, and share it. Share the show or clips of the show with someone that you think will enjoy it. The content of this podcast does not constitute medical advice or mental health treatment. Consult with a medical or mental health professional if you believe you are in need of mental health treatment.